You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
It is a real joy for us to welcome you all here. Habemus Papam.
Rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition.
Hello and welcome to the OnePeterFive podcast, episode number 48. My name is Steve Skojek. I am the founder, publisher, and executive director of OnePeterFive and the host of this podcast. And I wanted to take a moment to thank you for all your feedback on last episode's video podcast. We decided to give it a shot, and it did pretty well. People were very happy with it. We got a lot of positive feedback and commentary, so we are going to do our best to continue with these, also to increase the frequency with which they appear. My goal is to start having a weekly podcast. I have to free enough time out of my schedule to make it happen. I have to admit, the first one took a lot longer than I had anticipated. There was some pretty steep learning curves involved with some of the software. I had to learn an entirely new package of editing software in order to piece things together in the way that I needed to. And there was just a bunch of technical issues that I was banging my head against the wall for 2 solid days to get a 1-hour podcast out. But we did. We got it out, and to fabulous critical acclaim. So we're happy with that. One of the challenges, honestly, that we face is just limitation of resources. We don't have a studio. Never had a studio for podcasting. Don't have a studio for this. So what you're looking at here is actually my office, my home office where I work every day, doing the things that we do for OnePeterFive. I need to remember not to shake that camera. See, this is one of the things I'm not good at. But so yeah, this is my home office, and it has its limitations. I'm not a huge fan of the colors in here. That's a story that I'm just not going to go into right now. But I don't love them. I feel like I'm in a tinker's barn or something like that. And there's just sort of with that yellow and the dark green behind me, there's a kind of dinginess that happens in the room. It's okay if we get enough natural light in here, but it's been raining for like 40 days and 40 nights here in Virginia. So it's been dark and cloudy out pretty much every day. And the way that we have sought to compensate for that is to add some lights in here. My wife is a lovely purveyor of fine real estate here in Virginia. She has been a real estate agent for many, many years. And she's been doing more video. And she got some studio lights for some of the video that she's doing. And I stole one today. She's not here. Actually, she helped me set it up. But if she were here, she might want it back. But anyway, so there's not a lot of room in here. And I'm just going to show you really quickly kind of how we had to set this up, because it's sort of fun to see behind the scenes. But here's our St. Michael statue that everybody loves back there. And in order to make sure he's lit, I have this diffused light over there. Pay no attention to the robot statues. That's a different story altogether. And then, of course, here's the computer setup where we do the editing. And there is a nice softbox light that's diffused. And our podcast from the last episode is currently up on the screen. Had to do some work on that and pull out all the stuff from last episode so that I can use the template for this one. So that's our setup. And I've got, all these wires and things and barely fit that light behind my desk. But, we're getting better at this. We're going to keep working on it. And I think that we will improve as time goes on. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for your feedback. We're really glad that you liked the last one, and we're having fun doing these. So we hope to continue. Pretty soon, if we're lucky, we will be able to do some video interviews of guests. That's the next item on my list, to figure out how to make sure that we can do that and have it work well. So today's episode, I want to talk about something that's, pretty serious. Not that we always talk about serious stuff, but this thing that happened in Ireland, man. I was surprised and not surprised. Let me back up. So Ireland last week had a referendum on repealing their constitutional protection for the unborn. In 1983, Ireland added this amendment to their constitution that gave specific protection to the unborn from the scourge of abortion that was sweeping the world, right? 1970, I'm drawing a blank. 73 was Roe versus Wade? I think so. I'm probably wrong. 1970s was Roe versus Wade. Anyway. And Ireland did the right thing, and they decided, hey, we're going to protect our kids. You see, Ireland is thought of by most of the world as a Catholic country because it was for 1,600 years. Ireland and Catholicism are virtually synonymous, or have been, and I think that's why for so many people in America, what happened last week was such a huge shock, such a huge surprise. But I don't think it should have been. I think the way that I phrased it is, Ireland, you break my heart, but you do not surprise me. Like many Americans, I claim quite a good bit of Irish heritage. My paternal grandmother was the daughter of Irish immigrants. There's Irish on both sides of my family. Yes, I have a Slavic last name, but my grandfather, my dad's dad, was the son of Slovak immigrants, and his wife, my grandmother, was the daughter of Irish immigrants. And it's a pretty recent history. There's a lot of Irish in my background, and there's this weird cultural identification thing that happens with American Irish Catholics. You just feel connected. I've never even been to Ireland, but you just feel connected somehow. And I think that if you're an American Irish Catholic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're from Ireland, you probably think we're weird for feeling that way, but we do. And so this one kind of struck a blow. And one of the people who I think has been really excellent, actually, about this is C.J. Doyle, who is the executive director for the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. He has written a number of things about this referendum. Actually, his alerts were the reason why I kind of started tuning in to what was going on over there, because I really didn't even know that this vote was coming, and then all of a sudden it was on top of us. So that's something I want to talk to CJ about. I'm going to have him on the show today, but just sort of how this snuck up. And maybe it was just me. Maybe I just have too much news in front of me. But I didn't see this coming, and then suddenly it was done. And what's crazy about it to me is this vote, you could expect there being a margin. I mean, here in the States, they're constantly polling, and it's around 51-49 about, should abortion be legal in most cases or should it not? And there's a very even split in the United States. So Ireland, which has this deeply ingrained Catholicism in its culture, you would expect that it would be at least close there. But it wasn't. It was like 66 to 34% in favor of the repeal. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was 2-1. And that's pretty devastating. And then in cities like Dublin, I mean, the number was 77%. It was even higher. So I haven't seen statistics on the youth vote, but I can only imagine that they're just as bad. And it was just so overwhelming. And something that CJ wrote in one of his pieces, actually one that we republished here at OnePeterFive a few days ago, called Ireland Chooses Death. He pointed out that never in history has a people voted to kill its own. When we got Roe versus Wade here in the United States, it was a Supreme Court decision. There were some activist judges that read something into the 14th Amendment that didn't exist, and they imposed it on the country, and it was bad. But we didn't vote for it. We didn't ask for it. And CJ points out that in Nazi Germany, the people didn't even vote for, the extermination of millions of people. That wasn't a choice that was made by the masses. That came from the top. But Ireland just chose this. And they didn't just choose it. They celebrated it. I don't know if you've seen what that looked like. But it's probably the most disgusting thing about all of this. Look at this video. So these women are sitting here waiting for the announcement to come out. Look at the anticipation. And then the announcement comes, and it is like the most exciting thing. They just won the Super Bowl. This is the biggest moral victory, and they are so enthusiastic about the the newfound ability to kill their own children and have it be legal. God, look at that. They're so happy about it. It's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. How does a people become this? How do you become enthusiastic about the prospect of murdering innocent babies? What is wrong with you, Ireland? Where does this come? I mean, it's demonic. Where does it come from? How do you give yourselves over to this? And of course, Ireland has been on this trajectory for a while. Ireland, they voted a couple years ago in another referendum to legalize same-sex marriage. And then 2 years after that, they elected their first homosexual prime minister, who was very involved in pushing this next deconstruction of the moral framework of Ireland. And this is just, it's devastating stuff. And we need to take some time and wrestle with this, because it's not normal for people to act this way. It's not normal for such a precipitous decline in the moral fabric of a culture that is so steeped in the Catholic faith, that is so known, for its missionaries and its priests. How did we get here? So I want to talk about this with a couple of people. So CJ Doyle will be on the show here in a little bit. And then I also will be speaking a little later on to a fellow by the name of John Lacken, who is secretary of the Lumen Fidei Institute in Ireland and also a columnist for the Catholic Voice there. John is going to give us some perspective on what's going on the ground in Ireland, what the feel is there. How are the Catholics, the no voters, what are they doing? What are they doing next? How do they cope with this defeat? So I'm not going to belabor my monologue here. I want to get right to those conversations because I think we've got a lot to talk about. So stay tuned. I'll be back with CJ Doyle right after this.
You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
Joining me now on the phone is CJ Doyle. He is the executive director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. And if I may be frank, I think that he's been an absolute rock star on this issue. The statements that he's been making have been really, really important. So, Mr. Doyle, thank you for joining us on the program today.
I'm delighted to be here, Steve.
So I want to start off, obviously I want to talk to you about this Irish referendum and your perspective on it, but I also want to know a little bit more about you. And you obviously have a very deeply personal connection to what's happening in Ireland. So what's your story and why are you so invested in what just took place?
Well, first of all, obviously, I'm a Catholic, and Ireland has been a bastion of Catholicism for 16 centuries, for 60 generations. It is Ireland that helped preserve the learning of classical antiquity during the so-called Dark Ages, during the so-called the period of the conversion of the barbarians, and it's the Irish that helped re-evangelize Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Scotland, England, much of Western Europe, some of the monks that helped found Charlemagne's first cathedral school in Paris were Irish, which later went on to become the Sorbonne. So you've seen Ireland play a disproportionately beneficial impact in the preservation of Christian civilization and in the spread of the Catholic faith. In fact, one of the ironic legacies of the British Empire is that though all of Britain's African colonies are now independent and the association with the British Commonwealth is very tangential, the most enduring legacy of the British Empire in Africa are large numbers of Irish missionaries and large Catholic populations in countries like Nigeria.
Yeah.
So the Irish have really done perhaps more than many others in both preserving the Catholic faith and in spreading it throughout the world. Also, I'm Irish American myself. I'm all four of my grandparents were Irish. Three of them were born in Ireland. They were pious Catholics, and they were dedicated Irish nationalists. They admired Eamon de Valera, who was one of the greatest, who was the founding father of Ireland and one of the greatest Catholic statesmen of the 20th century, the man who wrote Ireland's magnificently Catholic Constitution of 1937, which really is perhaps the most profoundly Catholic juridical framework for political and social order in the 20th century. So I came from a pious Catholic home of people of Irish birth and Irish ancestry. And again, this is just so heartbreaking to see what has happened, that Ireland, which endured so much persecution and privation and destruction at the hands of the enemies of the faith, should inflict upon themselves the destruction that the British and the Vikings and so many others over the centuries could not accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I mean, one of the things that really I think has blindsided Catholics in America, in my perspective, they think of Ireland, because of all those reasons that you state, as a Catholic country. And something that you said in your analysis is that after 16 centuries and more than 60 generations of Catholic faith and Christian culture and civilized morals, the Irish people, and I'm quoting here, the Irish people have repudiated their religion, betrayed their heritage, scorned their ancestors, and abandoned their historic identity only to descend into barbarism. Now, I don't think anybody can argue with your conclusion here, but I think that a lot of people that I was seeing, talking about this issue, especially people of Irish ancestry, and I'm one of them, felt totally blindsided by this because they think of Ireland as a Catholic country. So how did we get to this point?
Well, first of all, this has been a very long process of incremental betrayals. It really, in some ways, goes back to the 1960s. In a juridical and a legislative sense, it goes back to 1972. In 1972, Irish voters, by a referendum margin of I think, 84%, approved a constitutional amendment repealing Article 44 of the Irish Constitution, which recognized the Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church as the guardian of the faith professed by the great majority of citizens. So we saw this secularization beginning really in 1972. And by the way, one of the people who advocated it was John Hume, who was a hero to the nationalist community in Northern Ireland, and who was the leader of the Social Democratic and Labour Party and was known as pro-life. So and John Hume wrote in Foreign Affairs that Ireland must, if we're going to accomplish Irish unity, Ireland must cease to be a confessional state, meaning a Catholic state. So you have a pro-life conservative in 1972 arguing for secularization. So see, obviously there's already something very wrong there. And then in 1973, the Irish Supreme Court recognized the right to marital privacy, which is this complete distortion of the notion of privacy, similar to Griswold versus Connecticut in America, which laid the basis for contraception. And then in 1979, you saw the first legalization of contraception. It was opened very, very. It was only a very small opening in the door. It was, you had a prescription. It had to be a married couple, and they had to have prescription from a physician. And most physicians were pro-life then and didn't give out such prescriptions. But then in the 1980s, you see contraception legalized and eventually legalized for over-the-counter sales for anyone over 17. And then in 1992, you had the so-called X case, in which the Irish Supreme Court permitted abortion in the case of suicidal ideation. In other words, if a woman claimed that she was suicidal, if she couldn't have an abortion, she could then have an abortion. And then, what we're seeing today, Steve, is that a lot of people are talking about, I think they're perhaps gilding the lily here, pro-lifers in Ireland are talking about much of the yes vote for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment to the repeal of the prohibition against abortion was a soft vote. But I think much of the pro-life vote was, in fact, a soft vote. You saw three referendums way back in 1992, 25 years ago, which essentially had pro-abortion outcomes. You saw a referendum by 65% national vote, which rejected an amendment that would overturn this X case that allowed abortion in the case of suicidal ideation. You saw the 13th Amendment to the Irish Constitution passed by a very large margin, about 62%, establishing the right to travel outside the country for the purpose of procuring an abortion. And between 6,000 and 8,000 women a year went to England to get abortions. If you look at United Kingdom Ministry of Health statistics for the last 25 years, you'll see that something like 169,000 women who procured abortions in England gave Irish addresses. So you have, literally, tens and tens of thousands of women going abroad to get abortions. You also saw the 14th Amendment passed 25 years ago by 59%, which established the right to obtain information about abortion. So again, this is the vaunted pro-life vote and the strong pro-life barrier in the Eighth Amendment to the Irish Constitution was not quite as firm and as solid as some pro-lifers would have us believe. In fact, you've had this trend towards abortion and, of course, towards contraception, which is also abortifacient, going on for 30 years now. And then, of course, we saw the various things since 2010, civil partnerships, same-sex marriage, homosexual adoption. So you see this further de-Christianization. So the trend has been very disturbing. And I think the trajectory also is very disturbing. If you look at the marriage, the 1995 referendum 23 years ago, which legalized divorce in Ireland, it passed by a microscopic margin. It was 50.2%. Okay. And it was, by the way, it was clearly a rigged referendum, not rigged in the sense of ballot fraud, but rigged in the sense that the government spent money and used its resources to promote one outcome, which would be clearly illegal and unconstitutional in any American state. And then, so that was about 50. So half the country voted for divorce in 1995. Then 3/5 of the country, more than 3/5, 62%, voted for sodomy, for same-sex so-called marriage in 2015. Now, nearly a fraction under 2/3, 66.3%, have voted for the killing of unborn children in 2018. So we've gone from a country that was half de-Christianized and de-Catholicized in 1995 to a country that was 3/5 de-Christianized in 2015 to a country that's clearly 2/3 de-Christianized in 2018. So it's, again, the trajectory is very disturbing.
Well, I mean, that's what really blew me away about this. I can't say I was entirely surprised at the outcome of the vote, even though it was very disappointing, but that it was such a strong majority. I mean, that to me was really the eye-opener. And, you made the point, and it's one I don't think people are talking about enough, that this was unique because it was the people, as you said, who voted for mass murder. I mean, this didn't happen in Roe versus Wade, which was imposed by an activist court. It didn't even happen, as you said, in Nazi Germany. Go ahead.
The majority never voted in Nazi Germany for mass murder. In Britain, when they legalized abortion in 1967 with the Abortion Act, it was Parliament that did it. And in America, it was Roe versus Wade. Or in the case of some of the states that had legalized it before then, it was the legislature and the governor, like Nelson Rockefeller in New York. But you've never had a national plebiscite, a national referendum, in which 2/3 of the people are complicit in child murder.
Right. And then when the votes came in, when the results came in, we see these horrifying videos of people cheering and dancing in the streets. And, they're not just, this isn't just this somber necessity that they tried to sell the vote as of, sometimes, the life of the mother. And I mean, they were celebrating the license they'd given themselves to take the lives of unborn children. And that, to me, I mean, is there any explanation for that kind of behavior?
Well, I think it's satanic. I think it's demonic. I think it's preternatural.
Yeah.
It's clearly odium fidei. They seem to hate the Catholic faith. And we've seen this terrible cartoon in the Sunday Independent.
Yes, I saw it.
Where, which is the largest newspaper in Ireland. And by the way, which is traditionally the Fine Gael newspaper, the newspaper of the Fine Gael party, which sits as Christian Democrats in the European Parliament. So this is the Christian Democratic paper in Dublin of the so-called rosarectomy, a rosaryrectomy, where you have a surgeon removing a rosary from a woman's womb and saying, "Good, the obstruction has been removed."
Yeah.
So this is hideous. This is the hatred of of our Lord, hatred of His Blessed Mother, hatred of the Church which He founded.
Well, so something that I see people talking about is that this is a reaction against the church and against the recent scandals, whether they're real or perceived. Clerical sex abuse, the big thing that came out about the Magdalene laundries and all this. I mean, were these things in people's minds, do you think, as they voted, or were they just, I don't know, were they just voting against the Catholic Church, sort of their own French Revolution?
Well, I think it's both. I think this contributed to it. But I'd like to make a point about Massachusetts, which I think is very telling and which applies here to Ireland. The stories about the Archdiocese of Boston covering up the homosexual molestation of minors broke in January of 2002, and that's when the cascade in the media occurred, and the final cardinal law was driven out of office, and this rampant anti-Catholicism became apparent. But in October of 2001, which is 3 months before these stories broke, there were two votes in the Massachusetts State Senate. One was on domestic partners legislation, and the other was on what we now call Obamacare, a contraceptive mandate in group health insurance for employers and for the state. And one passed 39 to 1, and the other was unanimous. So the influence of the faith was already dead, clearly, 3 months before the first stories broke about sexual abuse. So yes, I think in Ireland the stories of sexual abuse did exacerbate the situation. But the faith, I think, has been running on fumes for a very long time, and I think this is pandemic in the West, and I think it goes back to the 1960s and the deconstruction of the traditional faith and the suppression of the traditional mass and modernism in the church and the general abandonment of all of the things of all of the spiritual and theological and intellectual assets that contributed to the formation of Catholics, including a lack of we've had a lack of catechesis in Ireland, also in America. We've had this kind of sappy ecumenism, which promotes religious indifferentism. We've seen a complete, backing away from the traditional doctrine of no salvation outside the church. And of course, we've seen the suppression of the traditional liturgy, which was so sublime and so magnificent and so God-oriented, as opposed to this kind of more vernacular and you might say man-centered liturgy. So I think a whole series of the revolution in the church, I think, began the process of decline. And I think the abuses and the scandals, I think, merely accelerated it.
Yeah, and I mean that's an interesting point that I noticed that you made in your analysis. Ireland chooses death. I mean, it's something that honestly you're the only person that I've seen talk about that the post-Vatican II Church in 50 years managed to create this destruction that took 2,000 years to build this. And then it's just gone. I mean, it's like all the to borrow that title from Hans von Balthasar, the bastions were raised, and boy did they come down.
And the windows were open to the world, and the torrent came in. It's really Ireland is now missionary territory again. It's incredible. It's gone back to the work of St. Patrick has been reversed. It's gone back to being a pagan country.
Have you seen? Because this is something I've seen people talk about. Is this repaganization of Ireland? I mean, is that something you're seeing evidence of?
Oh, very clearly, and I think it. Clearly, there's this rampant. Sexual immorality. I mean, if we can speak bluntly, I mean, people voted on May 25th for the right to fornicate without consequence, to engage in carnal relations without the responsibility of marriage or children. Mm-hmm. So clearly, I think the capital sin of lust played a part. But it's also, again, this the role of sodomy, the role of the homosexual movement, the role of this kind of militant feminism, the role of a media which is just hysterically anti-Catholic, and the growth of and I think the growth of the occult plays a part. I think that there's a whole series of things going on in Ireland, which is again very, very, very disturbing.
So you're mentioning
it's so sad to see all this.
Yeah, no, it is. And so you bring up, the problem of the embrace of sodomy and of this whole homosexual culture, but you also mentioned the role of homosexual clergy. And I found interesting the way you worded it. You said that the disproportionately homosexual Irish clergy played a role. Is the problem really worse in Ireland with this?
It's very difficult to know. We've seen statistics here. Even kind of liberal commentators and liberal Catholics have mentioned in America that the lowest number I've seen is about 15% of the clergy are homosexual, which would place it at by again the most liberal estimate, at least 5 times that of the rest of the population. Yeah. And some figures have placed it as high as 58%. It's really impossible to know. But we have seen numerous homosexuals, just on an anecdotal basis, numerous homosexual scandals. We had a recent one in Maynooth, the National Seminary, where 2 seminarians were found basically in bed together, and they later claimed it wasn't a homosexual encounter, they were just drunk. So it was, I suppose alcoholism is to be preferred to sodomy in this case, but still it's not edifying. I remember when I was in Ireland, visiting Ireland many years ago, there was just an appalling case of a priest who apparently had a heart attack and died in a gay bar in Dublin, and somebody said it turned out all right because 2 other priests who were there gave him the last rites.
Oh my goodness!
So, oh my goodness!
Yeah.
So yeah. It's really this. I think the homosexualization in the church is not a problem unique to Ireland. Whether it is worse in Ireland than in this country, I think there's no kind of statistical evidence to support it one way or the other. It's very difficult to know, but it clearly is a problem, and you clearly did have molestation, and you clearly did have a homosexual influence in the clergy, and of course, people who reject divine and natural law in this matter are not going to advocate for divine and natural law in the matter of the sanctity of innocent human life from conception to natural death, are they?
Exactly. Yeah, it flattens that resistance. Yeah. So. It's such a profound set of problems, and the conclusion that you reach, which is, it's a pretty bold conclusion. You talked about this marking the end of Christendom in Europe, but the question that I immediately want to ask is, well, what about Poland and what about Hungary? There's places where it seems like the light's shining a little brighter these days. Do you really think that this is taps for Christendom?
Well, in terms of the traditional Catholic civilization of Europe, which, by the way, was centered around, among other things, the traditional Latin Mass and the traditional Latin office, and a belief in the necessity of the Catholic Church for salvation, that seems to be gone entirely. Poland, was a communist country where they had legal abortion, and they've been working back from that and doing more to restrict it, but it's still illegal in some cases in Poland. Hungary, you see, is a very interesting phenomenon, though it should be pointed out that the president of Hungary, who is doing so much to defend the West, is a Calvinist, not a Catholic. Viktor Orban.
Right.
He's married to a Catholic wife, but we really don't see the kind of Catholic leadership. Even just 2 generations ago, we saw all of this Catholic leadership that was born in the last quarter of the 19th century. Just about Hilary Belloc made the point that it took about 4 generations to recover from the French Revolution to the faith was very strong again, say in the 1880s, 1890s. And you saw de Gaulle in France, and you saw de Gasperi in Italy, and Salazar in Portugal, and Franco in Spain, and De Valera in Ireland, and Adenauer in West Germany, and of course Kaiser Karl in Austria and Hungary, and you don't see any of this Catholic leadership anymore. The Catholics have simply conformed to the culture and in many ways surrendered to the spirit of the times and become subservient to elite secular opinion. So it's I think what depresses me and what concerns me is that you can't save our civilization until the institution which created our civilization, the Roman Catholic Church, is itself kind of saved and reformed, and there isn't a lot of evidence right now that the Church is going in the right direction, which I think is very bad news for the West. One of de Gaulle's advisors was a Raymond Aron, who was Jewish. And he wrote in his memoirs that he saw no hope for Europe because they had abandoned their founding principle. And he identified their founding principle as Roman Catholicism. So here a non-Catholic could clearly see what secularized Catholics could not see.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
incredible.
that should concern us.
And obviously, I mean, in many cases, if not most, it seems that Catholics have fallen further than almost everyone. And you mentioned, again, there were so many great points that you made in that piece. I mean, I think that it's a milestone decision, but your analysis of it is going to go down in the history books. And mentioned that the apostate Catholics, that the Protestants in Northern Ireland need to be saved from the apostate Catholics in the South. I mean, that is a devastating line.
And by the way, I'm not a monarchist in this matter. I'm a longtime Irish nationalist and Irish Republican, and my grandfather's uncle Peter Hanbury was nearly beaten to death by the Black and Tans during Ireland's War of Independence, and so I have no sympathy for the British monarchy or for the Orange Order or for Northern Ireland. Right. But it's simply true in this case. Ian Paisley's son, and Ian Paisley, of course, was somebody that had Catholic blood on his hands. Ian Paisley's son has just said we won't be bullied into accepting abortion in Northern Ireland. Good. Well, good for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've said the North is next. Theresa May, I think what an irony and what a devastating irony that Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has congratulated the Irish on the decision, this pitiless decision to exterminate their own children. And now her Minister of Health, Penny Mordaunt MP, has said that we must move to legalize abortion in Northern Ireland. So I think we have to kind of reevaluate our view of Irish unity at this point. Yeah. Because it's really outside of Malta, Northern Ireland is now the only place in Western Europe where human life is protected. Wow. So we really need to, the next battle will be Northern Ireland, and we need to support this is just appalling for me as a Catholic to say this, as an Irish nationalist. The only pro-life party in Ireland now is the Democratic Unionist Party. Mm. You know? And just what an irony and what in some ways a tragedy. And again, I don't criticize them for being pro-life. I admire and commend them for being pro-life. But the party founded by Eamon de Valera, Fianna Fáil, is now pro-abortion. The party founded by Arthur Griffith, Sinn Féin, is now pro-abortion. The party founded by Liam Cosgrave, Fine Gael, is now pro-abortion. Yeah, it's just the apostasy is just so complete and so offensive to anyone that has any kind of Irish sensibility or sympathy, and so tragic.
I mean, I know this is an impossible question to answer, but where do things go from here in Ireland? You talk about everything that's been lost. You talk about all the things that have been taken away that served as bulwarks against this, this turn in the moral tide. But I mean, is it nothing but free fall from here on out? If Ireland has become, missionary territory, where do we start? Where do we start to get that back?
Well, I don't mean to depress your viewers and listeners, but I think Ireland is going to get much worse in the near term than better. Ireland has no First Amendment, and there's no jurisprudential or legislative tradition regarding conscience clauses. Mm-hmm. So we don't. The people that oppose abortion in Ireland, whether they're doctors, nurses, pharmacists, medical technicians, hospital administrators, I think they're going to have a very serious burden imposed on their conscience, and I think Catholic institutions are going to see their religious freedom in peril. There's already a rumor somewhere that Mater Hospital in Dublin, a Catholic hospital, has already been forced to do an abortion under this suicidal ideation provision. And so I think you're going to see attacks on religious freedom, attacks on the rights of conscience. I think you're going to see the persecution, and of course, by the media, the demonization of the continued demonization of pro-lifers. This emboldened the other side enormously. Even the other side did not. This is like the German army in 1940. Even they didn't expect the breadth and extent of their victory. So I think this will embolden the opposition tremendously. And again, we're seeing just such a weak, tepid response from the Irish hierarchy. We just had the Archbishop of Armagh, the Primate of All Ireland, walking back from statements where he basically endorsed the position of Bill Clinton and James Carroll that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Obviously, it's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a safe abortion. And he's been forced to retract that.
But the only reason he walked it back, by the way, CJ, is because I kept bugging his office saying, give me, don't tell me that he was misquoted. I want to know, in what context can you make a statement like that, Catholic? And finally they came back and they were like, well, the Archbishop wants you to know that he shouldn't have said it.
Well, Congratulations to you, Steve, and I commend you for that. It's just appalling. In 1560, the archbishops, bishops, and abbots of Scotland sat there in the House of Lords while the Catholic religion was abolished and while the Mass was suppressed, and they did nothing. They did nothing. They were concerned with their own lives, with their own property, with the political interests of their families. And, you wonder really if this is the case today. 1/3 of Irish priests reportedly belong to the Association of Catholic Priests in Ireland, which is this apostate group, which came out and said that during the referendum that priests shouldn't preach politics from the pulpit, and that the abortion issue was too nuanced and complex to have an easy solution. So 1/3 of the priests are traitors, put it bluntly.
I mean, they might as well just give them a civil constitution of the clergy to sign.
Yeah, exactly. And, even in France, which was hideously corrupt in the 18th century, even in France, and even with the king supporting at one point the civil constitution of the clergy, half of the priests in France refused to sign the civil constitution of the clergy. And it's just this is more like England under Elizabeth or under Henry VIII, where I think it was under Henry VIII 99% of the priests took the oath of supremacy, and under Elizabeth about 90% took the oath of supremacy. So this is apostasy not only among the Catholic laity, this is apostasy among the Catholic clergy.
Well, goodness and decency are certainly the underdogs these days. Let me switch tactics before I let you go. I do want to talk to you just briefly, because we managed to skip past it, but about your organization and, if people are interested, how they can get information from you. So the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, what is it? How did it get involved? And how do people get on your mailing list? Because honestly, the only reason I got your alerts is because people were forwarding them to me. I'd like to tell people if they want to sign up and get information from you, how to do that.
Well, first of all, if they want to contact us, our email address is catholicactionleague@gmail.com. That's catholicactionleague@gmail.com. Our website is www.catholicactionleague.org. And we were originally, the genesis of our group goes back really to the 1970s. We were originally the Massachusetts chapter of the national organization, the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. And in 1995, we became independent, like the Minnesota chapter. In 1995, we became independent of the New York organization, and we became the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. And for the last 23 years, we've focused pretty much entirely on Massachusetts and New England issues. And we're a Catholic anti-defamation and religious freedom rights organization. But, it's interesting that when we started, so much of our work was involved in responding to attacks on the church in the media and responding to attempts to infringe on the constitutional rights of Catholics. But now so much of what we do is really kind of defending basically Catholic moral teaching in the absence of the church doing so, and speaking out against scandals in the church. We didn't intend ever to be kind of the church police, but more often than not, Steve, we have people in the Boston media contacting us, and I'll talk to them and I'll ask them, did you hear from the Massachusetts Catholic Conference, or did you hear from the Archdiocese, which, by the way, has a six-figure communications director and two high-priced PR firms, and they'll say that they reached out to the Archdiocese of the Catholic Conference and they couldn't get a response on some moral issue.
Right.
So they come to us.
Yeah.
So, I suppose we should be grateful that the media does come to us, but still it's appalling that there's no institutional response from the church. So more often than not in recent years, we've been speaking out on these moral issues simply because you're getting silence from the hierarchy and the clergy.
Yeah, and it's a tough position to be in. I mean, I know it's what we do too, and you don't want to be in the position of, hey, so the worst enemies to the Catholic faith right now are on the inside. But it's how things are.
Exactly. So we've had a loyal group of supporters here, but if somebody wants to support us, again, you can reach us by email, but catholicactionleague@gmail.com, and our website www.catholicactionleague.org, or you can reach us by telephone at 617-524-6309. That's 617-524-6309. 6309, and we welcome support all around the country. Whenever a few years ago, we put out a statement about how the Knights of Columbus refused to expel pro-abortion public figures. We had a resolution here in the state Massachusetts Knights of Columbus Convention, and it was vetoed by the Supreme Headquarters in New Haven. And we get contacts from all over the country from people contacting us, saying that we were the only ones speaking out on this issue, and they've been experiencing the same thing there. So even though we are a Massachusetts, New England kind of focused organization, we do get a lot of people from around the country helping us and contacting us, because they're seeing the things that are going on here in Massachusetts are often being duplicated in the rest of the United States.
Yeah, so I just want to stress to our listeners and viewers, check them out, because really, I mean, your alerts are the reason why I actually really started figuring out what was going on. I was unfortunately very ignorant of the whole referendum coming, and then suddenly it was on top of us, and the vote was happening. Yeah. And I don't know how many other Catholics, it may just be, an occupational hazard, because I deal with so much news all the time that this one just blew past me. But I mean, it was just, I have to thank you, because you put it into context for me and helped me to understand, what was happening and how big the issue was. And then your I'm not to be morbid, but your post-mortem on this vote, I think it was really critical. And so if you haven't read it, we'll link it again in the show notes for this. But it's called, Ireland Chooses Death. So CJ Doyle, Executive Director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Steve. And can I just make one final point?
Sure, absolutely.
The referendum didn't actually legalize abortion. It removed the constitutional provision protecting human life. There is still going to be a battle for the actual statutory enabling legislation that will actually legalize abortion in Ireland. So we have another fight on our hands. Now, as I said, the numbers are entirely against us. All four major political parties and the government and the Prime Minister are in favor of legalization. So it will undoubtedly pass. But you might say the circumstances and the exceptions and the exemptions and the various details of that still have to be worked out. So there's going to be another huge battle in Ireland in the next few months regarding the actual legalization. So the mass killing hasn't started yet, but it will in a few months. It may even be at the beginning of 2019. But there is another. We need to continue praying for Ireland and continue obviously praying for Northern Ireland. But this was just the first. This was not an end. This was the beginning of a much larger battle.
Yeah. So everybody, make sure that you sign up for Catholic Action League alerts, because they're going to keep you informed in a way that I couldn't hope to keep up with. So thank you again so much for being with us.
Thanks, Steve, very much.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
I am joined now by John Lacken, Secretary of Lumen Fidei Institute, which is an association of Catholic laypeople engaged in cultural and educational matters. He is also a columnist with Catholic Voice, a bi-weekly publication for Ireland and the UK with both print and online editions. Thank you for being on the show with us today, John.
You're very welcome, Steve. It's good to talk to you.
So you're coming to me from where exactly?
I live about 10 minutes from Knock in Ireland, which is where we had a Marian Eucharistic apparition in 1879.
Yes.
It's in the west of Ireland, in County Mayo, the wettest county of Ireland, although the sun has been shining for the last 5 days. When people ask about Ireland and weather, I just say the rain is warmer in the summer than it is in the winter.
I think that we got your rain here. I feel like I have to build an ark. It's been weeks since I've seen the sun.
Oh, you can keep it.
All right, so let me get right to this. For American Catholics, well, for me anyway, this referendum on the vote to remove legal protection for the unborn from the Irish Constitution sort of snuck up on me. I started hearing slogans about Save the Eighth on social media, but I didn't really know what they were about until very close to the vote. And then the next thing that I knew, it was done and over with. So for the benefit of those who are listening who may not have been any more aware of this than I was, how did this come about, and how long has it been, in the works?
Well, there's been talk about it for several years. The amendment itself was put into the Constitution in 1983 because Irish people in the pro-life movement believed that what happened in the UK in 1967, that act could come into us because we had some basic common law that the UK had. So the amendment was put in 1983. It was voted in by a 2-to-1 majority. And then they tried to repeal it in 2002. They tried to change it to allow a certain amount of abortion. Then as our culture was, the Catholicism was declining, in 2015 they had a referendum on same-sex marriage, and the referendum went through very, very strongly in the favour of same-sex marriage. So I think from that they decided we can win this, because that was a big blow in the sense of the so-called Catholic Ireland. It showed that the fortress was not impregnable. And so when they got that victory, I think then they started planning on how they were going to overturn the Eighth Amendment and get rid of it altogether. So then they set up a false thing which they call the Citizens' Assembly. Now, it wasn't a citizens' assembly because the citizens had absolutely no say in how it was run, who was in charge of it, who would come to speak to it, etc. And the citizens' assembly, as I believe it was a ploy, it came back with the results that it said that they wanted to vote for unrestricted abortion. Just completely repeal the law.
Okay.
And from there, then the government realized that they wouldn't get away with that. So then they started talking about, well, let's do the limits. So they put in the hard cases, and then they said, and also we'll allow abortion on demand up to 12 weeks. But the thing is, whilst they have mooted that as legislation, what the referendum actually said is it takes out the Eighth Amendment, and it just simply says that the government has the right to legislate for the termination of pregnancy. So it's a blank document. They can legislate for termination of pregnancy right up until birth if they want to, and the Irish people now have no legal recourse. We cannot stop them. We cannot take a constitutional challenge against them.
So it was a two-step process. The first was remove the protection from the unborn from the Constitution. The second is now we need to enact legislation that says what we can do.
Yeah, well, there's two steps to it, although the referendum part was just the one step. The only thing that was blocking them was the Eighth Amendment.
Right.
So they could have, in the past, they have tried to put sort of specific legislation within the Constitution. But this time they just said a blank document that the government may legislate to terminate pregnancy.
So it was just a repeal of that protection, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the protection is now actually gone.
So what sort of opposition was mounted by pro-life organizations in the lead up to this?
Well, you have had several pro-life organisations which have been active in Ireland since the 1983 amendment, so they would have been campaigning against that. But again, it's a long discussion because from the point of view of the outsider, people who live outside of Ireland, we're a country with leprechauns and with Catholic saints. Ireland has not been a Catholic country for a long time. Sometimes the image to me comes of the whited sepulchre. On the outside, we look very, very Catholic, but if you actually scratch at the surface, you will realise that it's not Catholic at all. And one of the key indicators of that is that I would say that between 85 and 95% of Irish Catholics accept contraception in their marriages. So,
well, I mean, so this is something that I really want to focus on, because I think that a lot of people were blindsided by the fact of exactly what you're saying, that Ireland's not really a Catholic country anymore. I mean, we have this image of that being exactly what it is, and there's so many American Catholics who trace so much of their own ancestry back to Ireland, and there's just this, I don't know, there's an association, there's a benefit of the doubt that's given, and you've got a constitution that, you know, starts with a mention of the Holy Trinity and talks about obligations to Jesus Christ. This is something we can't even dream of here in America. And so I think a lot of people were like, whoa, you know, where did this come from? I mean, how long has Ireland been moving in this direction of, hey, we don't really care about this Catholic stuff anymore?
Yeah, well, where I would see where the key thing was, and again, for a lot of people, and again, as you say, I write articles on this, so I did a study basically on Ireland, and where I traced the key of it is 1968 and Humanae Vitae. So if you look back to the Ireland of 1968, very different from the Ireland today. We were a stronghold of the faith. We were a jewel in the crown of the church. We had a proud history of missionary work and evangelization throughout Europe and beyond. But the faith was also reflected in our laws. So in 1968 in Ireland, divorce was illegal. The sale and importation of contraceptives was illegal. There's no pornography on sale in the shops. And most of the shops would have been closed for business on Sundays, because Sunday was a holy day of obligation. And even on the weekday holy days obligation, the shops closed, abortion was illegal, and homosexual acts were illegal. And when I was looking at that, I remember the conversation that I had with my late father, Sean Lacken. We had a divorce referendum in 1995. And again, that's kind of amazing for some people to think that there was no divorce in Ireland until 1995. Yeah. And I remember my father said, and he was a devout Catholic, and he said, we never should have had a ban on divorce in the Constitution. And I wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but his reasoning was, you can't legislate to make people moral. You have to convince them of the truth of your convictions. And as I say, at the time I didn't understand what he meant, but it's one of those things that stuck in my head. But after, when I started looking at the 2015 referendum, I realized that what he meant is, what happened in Ireland is, I think the church became complacent. You didn't have to teach the teaching on divorce and why it was there, because it was illegal. You didn't have to teach about contraception. It was illegal. You didn't have to teach about so many things because they were actually illegal. So the church, I think, was sitting back on the back foot. But then in 1968, in the main seminary in Ireland, after the issuance of Humanae Vitae, 6 professors, all of them priests in Maynooth Seminary, publicly dissented from Humanae Vitae. And 2 of them were moral theologians. And the guys that they were teaching were the seminarians who were going to be the future priests. And as I say in the video that I produced, none of them were dismissed, none of them were disciplined. All of them were allowed to continue teaching seminarians the Catholic faith, even though they now dissented from official Catholic Church teaching. And that's where I think the real slip started. Then one of those, and this was, I noticed this particularly myself, because I got married in 1988. And when we did our pre-marriage course, all the different forms of contraception were discussed with us on a pre-marriage course that we were told was mandatory. And then when I did my research, I found that one of these senior professors of moral theology, who dissented publicly from Humanae Vitae in 1968, was appointed as secretary to what was called the Catholic Marriage Advisory Council, which was the organization that was running the pre-marriage courses on behalf of the bishops. Yeah. So somebody who publicly dissented from this was appointed to the commission that was designing the pre-marriage courses that was going to inform the young people who were getting married.
So it's the march through the institutions. I mean, they just baked it right in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact is the bishops were complicit.
Well, and so this brings me to another question that I have, which is, how involved were the clergy, particularly the bishops, in leading the fight against this repeal? I mean, did they show up? Because one of the things that a lot of people have noticed is the Pope wasn't anywhere to be found. So, where were the bishops?
Well, the bishops would have made some statements, and then some bishops would have issued statements within their diocese. There was no campaign on behalf of the bishops. My own mind is not firmly made up on this yet. There are some people who have said that if the bishops did get involved and actually campaigned, the result would have been worse, because the hostility towards Catholicism here is just, it's at a very high level. Just around the referendum, my own family situation, I don't have television. I generally stay away from the mainstream media because I just say I got to focus on what I'm doing. But coming up to the referendum, I just dipped into a couple of the mainstream medias like the Irish Times, RTE, to read a couple of statements. But it's when you get down to the comments section, even if nothing Catholic has been mentioned, you suddenly get this vitriol against the Catholic Church. They'll bring up the priest abuse thing. They'll say, if you want to believe in fairy tales, and all of this sort of stuff comes through there. And you sort of wonder, where are these people coming from? And then, as I say, what you realise, again, when you look at the vote in Ireland, the analysis on the exit poll from RTE said that 87.6% of the 18 to 24-year-old cohort voted for abortion. And these are the guys, the vast majority of these have come from schools that are Catholic schools. And in Ireland, the Catholic schools are under the patronage of the Irish bishops. So when you have that many who have just come out of school, and they have absolutely no semblance of the Catholic faith, it just shows you the level of the problem that we have.
That was the one statistic that I hadn't seen that I've been looking for, is what the youth vote was, because it was 2/3 in favor. In Dublin, it was 77%. The numbers kept going up as you narrowed down your niches, but you just knew that's where the youth seem to be going everywhere right now.
Yes. Well, the other interesting thing about the exit poll is that of all of the age cohorts, the only cohort that voted no was the 65-plus cohort. Every other cohort voted in favour by smaller margins as you get older. But as I say, so you're starting at 87.6%, and then it's gradually narrowing down. But only when you got to the 65-plus did you actually get a no vote. And
so,
then you had the one county that in Ireland that actually always bucks the trend, Donegal.
Yeah.
If you have Donegal ancestors, you can be proud. They voted no.
So, I mean, you mentioned this hostility toward the church. Is this just because it's just been one thing after another? I mean, I don't know how much of this is blown out of proportion, but you hear the stuff about the Magdalene laundries, you hear about, the graves, you hear about the clerical abuse. But I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, some of the stories are blown out of proportion, but the one qualifier that I will say is that if one child is abused by a priest, it's one too many.
Of course,
there's no tolerable level. But what you've had is, so you had a certain amount of abuse by clergy, and again, the thing that the mainstream media doesn't want to look at, most of the abuse was homosexual abuse.
Yeah,
and that's not justifying and saying that it's okay, but most of it was same-sex attracted priests who basically abused males who were actually adolescents. So you're dealing with homosexuality rather than pederasty in the strict sense. And in that regard, then, that brings you back to the whole problem with Maynooth, because in Maynooth, one of the former presidents of Maynooth was accused of this crime.
Explain what that is, because I don't know what that is. Maynooth.
Which, Peter?
Maynooth.
Oh, sorry. Maynooth is the national seminary in Ireland.
Gotcha,
the only seminary that we have left standing.
Okay.
So in Maynooth, a president in Maynooth, I don't know the years now of this, but this president was actually, there were question marks going around about him being involved with a young underage boy. He eventually paid off the young boy. And there was a silence clause involved in that, a non-disclosure clause. Then he resigned 2 years after that. All the time he was on full pay. At his resignation, this is the president of Maynooth, at his resignation he was paid a €100,000 bonus to his pension. And he now lives in America somewhere. He's with the New Age community, and apparently he's living with a man in a relationship. So he was actually the president of Maynooth. He was the only one that was let go. And the other side to that story is there was one priest who went to 6 different bishops, and he said, look, there's problems with this guy. And that priest was actually sent to Siberia. Basically, they picked a small parish up in the north of Ireland, and they transferred him up to there. And that's
so there's no justice for any of this, and that's a reason for anger. But I guess, and you're right. One instance is one too many. But at the same time, to begin to associate in a culture that's been Catholic for 1,600 years, that these isolated cases equal the Catholic Church, that's a big leap. I mean, how do you get there from here? What is the state of the church now? You mentioned contraception. I mean, What other indicators do you have of the health or lack thereof of the church in Ireland in 2018?
Well, you would have some parishes in Dublin where the mass attendance rate is down as low as 5%.
Okay.
And then the average, I think, in Dublin is around 20-25%.
Are they closing parishes?
Sorry?
Are they closing parishes?
They're closing parishes, and they're doing what's called clustering of parishes and that sort of stuff. When you move further west in Ireland, you'll get to mass attendance rates of over 50%. And even I know on a couple of occasions when we have had foreign students coming to stay with us, and we take them to mass even during the week, and they see there might be 40 people at mass, they're kind of, what?
Yeah.
And again, that gives the impression that it's really Catholic. But then one of the other interesting indicators from the exit poll was that apparently 33% of Catholics who said they go to mass regularly, and regularly was more than once a month, voted yes for abortion. And 1% of those said that they attend mass more than twice per week. So they could be daily mass goers, and they voted yes for abortion.
How in the world does that happen?
Well, I think it's one of the things that I write about on different occasions is the whole nature of the concept of authority and how authority works within the church, and not only that, within society. When you think that all authority comes from God. So if you have a bishop, and the bishop is in charge of authority flows downhill.
Sure.
If the bishop is not prepared to obey those in authority above him, so if the bishop does not uphold the teaching document of the church with regard to an infallible statement on contraception, how can he expect those under his command to actually obey? Because they're going to see that he doesn't take obedience seriously.
Sure.
So he undermines his own authority. So it's the old thing, they're sawing off the branch that they're sitting on.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I mean, we've got the scandals in the church, and we've got, this diminishing teaching. Are there other, you would say, dominant influences that have led the Irish people away from so many centuries of, because it's not just doctrine and it's not just belief. I mean, it's bones deep in the culture, right? So what happens that uproots that in 20, 30 years? I mean, it's probably closer to half a century, but how do we get here from there?
Well, again, you also have in Ireland, which I think now I can't say because I don't know America that well, but I think even just from the little bit that I've seen, we do not have an alternative media. There is one media in Ireland, the mainstream media. There is no alternative to it. Catholic Voice has kind of come out. We're 10 years on the go, but our circulation is very, very low. Yeah. But from that point of view, and then also the state media, the state broadcaster is controlled by the government, and it's all controlled by left wing. So there's no, if you like, right wing media in Ireland.
Okay.
Everything is left wing. So the people, the populace, are being fed this steady stream. Then you have the other thing is that most Catholics, because the catechetical system in Ireland has collapsed, so most Catholics are not learning their doctrine. So they're not well formed in the faith, and then they're getting this stuff coming in from the media. Then we also have a couple of media darlings who are priests, and who are liberal dissenting priests. And again, these guys are free to speak. They get invited. For example, in Knock, where I am, they have an annual novena, and at the annual novena, it's twice a day, and there'll be about 7,000 people attending each of those, so 14,000 people attending every day for 10 days. Mm-hmm. But at that novena, for example, about 3 years ago, it might be 4, Father Timothy Radcliffe was invited to speak.
Yeah.
So
the man who compared gay sex to the Eucharist, yeah.
Yes, so he's invited to speak. So again, you're once again seeing that the dissenting voices, and then priests who are orthodox, they don't get the stage.
You know, it's confounding. I mean, and so, you know, the question that I have at the end of my list, you've answered some of the ones that I had. You anticipated them, but the one that I'm sure you're trying to figure out how to answer is what's next for Irish Catholic pro-lifers. I mean, where do you go from here?
Well, again, when people ask what's next and all that, and I say in the article that I have coming out in the next issue of the paper, you know, I say at the weekend of the referendum, my emotions were, they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. I was sad, I was angry, I was hurt, but I always had the seeds of hope. And my mother, she's 85 now. Next month, June. So she lives in Dublin, which is the capital. Yeah. So I was supposed to be doing a job, just fixing up something at the house there for her. So I was up in Dublin with my wife and 3 of my children at the weekend. And where Dublin is, there's a Benedictine monastery called Silverstream, close to that.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
So that's down Kirby. So I decided I was going to go to the Office of Thirst, the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. And as I said to people, you know, when I walked in there, because Friday night I didn't sleep that well when the exit poll results came out. Saturday morning I was back in hope, and I was thinking, hold on a minute. And then the way I describe it is the world is in turmoil. Satan has scored another apparent major victory. And yet when you arrive into the Catholic oasis of Silverstream Priory, where men gather to sing the praises of God and to try to live holy lives, life is going on as normal. And that's when I realized in the realm of the divine, nothing has changed. Yeah. God is still God. His commandments are still his commandments. His love for the unborn has not changed. His love for those who voted yes and for those who commit the atrocity of abortion hasn't changed. And his desire for us to be with him forever in heaven has not changed. So during that then, I remembered also St. Claude de la Colombière. So he was St. Margaret Mary Alacoque's spiritual director with the whole Revelation of the Sacred Heart. Yes. But he has, and if you haven't got it, I guarantee to get it for those times when things are really bleak. It's a treatise on divine providence. Now, when you first read it, it's very, very difficult. But let me just quote to you just the first paragraph of it. He says, "It is one of the most firmly established and most consoling of the truths that have been revealed to us, that apart from sin, nothing happens to us in life unless God wills it so. Wealth and poverty alike come from him. If we fall ill, God is the cause of our illness. If we get well, our recovery is due to God. We owe our lives entirely to him. And when death comes to put an end to life, his will be the hand that deals the blow." And then he asks, "But should we attribute it to God when we are unjustly persecuted? And he said, yes, he is the only person that you can charge with the wrong you suffer. He's not the cause of the sin or the person commits you to, but he actually allows the person to do it. And if he didn't allow them to do it, they couldn't do it. And so eventually he tells you that what we must do is trust in God, and we should thank him because he knows what he's doing in allowing us to suffer this trial. And as I say in my article, God knows why he has allowed us to suffer this defeat in the referendum. And my own thinking on this now is that perhaps God has allowed this defeat so that Irish Catholics would reflect deeply in order to discover why is it that we're losing the cultural wars. Because we didn't lose, the referendum wasn't lost on Friday. In Ireland, we have been losing the cultural wars since about 1968. They have been eroding, and the pro-life groups have been fighting a defensive battle all the time. We have never been on the offensive.
Sure.
We're just we keep them back, and then we're just waiting. They regroup and they come back and attack us. And as I said to some people, even if this referendum had been lost, for the people who held the referendum and who did it, it was a marketing exercise. If they lost this, then they would do their analysis and say, okay, the next time we go for this, here's how you win it. And as I say, I personally think that the same-sex marriage referendum was a marketing exercise for them. And I remember commenting to some people in the pro-life movement, because just before the government started putting the legislation together for holding the referendum on the same-sex marriage, they decided that for the first time in the history of Ireland, they were going to legislate according to what was known as the X case. Now, the X case was a case where a girl was raped within the family, and they said she couldn't have an abortion because of the 1983 referendum. Mm-hmm. So this case, the judge ruled that where there was a risk to the life of the mother from suicide, that an abortion was permissible under Irish law. But none of the governments ever had the nerve to touch it. But in 2013, they enacted legislation. But as I said to some people, I said, this legislation, while they're pushing it through and we can't stop it, I think it's a smokescreen, because I said same-sex marriage is coming down the tracks behind this, and nobody's watching it.
Yeah.
And so that's where you can see it's all orchestrated. And as I say to people, sometimes I wish the devil was on our side, because he's a master strategist, a master military guy. If he was on our side, I know he can never be, and I say that with my tongue in my cheek, but people have to realize who the devil is. Any man who thinks that he can take on the devil and win is a fool, and he's not going to win. That's where we have to humble ourselves and say, Lord, this is your battle. We just get slapped around, but we have to rise again. And as I say, I can't remember which saint it was, but our call is not to be successful, it's to be faithful. And that's what our Lord says, when I come back, will I find faith on earth? He doesn't say, will you have cleared up the place for me? Will everything be in order?
Right.
He says,
right.
will I find faith on earth? And so that's where it has to go. So as I say, from the initial thing on Friday night, as I say, I get a couple of mood swings, but in general I'm actually upbeat, and I think this is a great thing, because again, another saint, and I can't quote who it was, but he was playing a game of chess, and somebody asked him, said, Father, if you were told that the world was going to end in 5 minutes, what would you do? And he said, I would carry on playing my game of chess. So in other words, his mind was focused on what God was doing. And that's what Silverstream taught me, that the world hasn't changed. God is still God. There's all this stuff going on. Like, this is a blip from the point of view of eternity. This is a blip in the history. The other thing as well that I came across online was that people said, this is not the death knell of Ireland, this is the burial of Ireland. And I would just say, please don't bury us alive. There's a few of us still here fighting, and please don't start shoveling the muck on us just yet. Because as another thing that I've been saying to people, and it's a recommendation, and I recommend it to all your own people, is to read Maccabees Book 1. In the first book of Maccabees, the king has taken over, the Jewish faith is under attack, and now they're called and they have to make sacrifice to the king. They want just one grain of incense is all he wants. And the Maccabeans, the father Mattathias, he slays the two guys and does that, and then the Maccabeans head for the hills and they start fighting. Then at one time, the enemy are coming on a Sunday, and there's a group of them down in the valley, and they say, no, we're not fighting on Sunday. And they get wiped out. So Judas Maccabeus says to them, he said, we must fight and fight hard, otherwise we and our generations will be wiped off the face of the earth. And they do that. And it's amazing, because we're so badly catechized, what I found out when I was reading that story and just going through it, I didn't realize that when Judas Maccabeus finally reconquered the temple in Jerusalem, that's what the celebration of Hanukkah is. And they're still actually celebrating it over 2,000 years later. They're celebrating the victory of Judas Maccabeus over these guys. So that's what I say to people. We have to head for the hills. We have to group together, the remnant, and we have to fight and fight strong. But we have to fight for our lives, the lives of our children, and the lives of our grandchildren. And we will be successful. The victory is ours in the end. Many of us will be martyred, but we will be successful. But on martyrdom, the other thing that I've noticed is that we don't have the privilege of a bloody martyrdom. Our martyrdom is the martyrdom of ridicule, possibly the martyrdom of prison. They're not, in one sense, yet foolish enough to start spilling our blood. But I think it may come depending on how the whole Muslim question pans out, but that's another day's work.
Yeah, it is. Well, I have to thank you so much for ending this on a hopeful note, because it's not just what's happened in Ireland in the last few days. It's what's happening in the world. It's what's happening in the church. I mean, every day I hear from people who just feel so oppressed. And, I found myself saying, actually, after the vote came in, can the good guys win one once in a while? Like, just once. It'd be nice for the good guys to win. But you've reminded me of the perspective that we should have.
From the point of view of eternity, we actually are winning. But just on that note, and a little plug if I can, you mentioned Lumen Fidei, the World Meeting of Families. And this is another thing that I mentioned, like that our bishops are bringing over Cardinal Kupich, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, all of whom do not uphold the church teaching on marriage,
Correct.
to the World Meeting of the World Meeting of Families. So we looked at this and we said, what can we do? So a year ago, we decided we're hosting another conference in Dublin at the exact same time, just around the corner from where the World Meeting of Families is, for 2 days on the Wednesday and Thursday. We're calling ours a Conference of Catholic Families. Initially, I was going to call it the World Meeting of Catholic Families, but I thought that was just too similar to another event that's happening. But a Conference of Catholic Families, and what we're taking as the basis for our conference is the great encyclical of Pope Pius XII on marriage, Pope Pius XI, Casti Connubii.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when you ask the average Catholic in Ireland, I'm not sure how it is in America, and you say, with which encyclical did the Church condemn contraception? The answer you will get is Humanae Vitae. And the answer is wrong.
Right.
It was Casti Connubii. Humanae Vitae is just reiterating Casti Connubii.
Yeah.
Casti Connubii came out in 1930, the Lambeth Conference, when for the first time a Christian outfit said contraception was okay. So that's just, if anybody's around, if they go to our website, we have tickets for sale for that conference. It's going to be over 2 days. We have some very good speakers lined up for it. Father Thomas Wynandy is coming over. We also have another interesting situation in that some of our speakers, I can't say exactly who are well known to church circles, have been put under pressure not to come to our conference by the official members of the hierarchy, and not just in Ireland, from abroad as well. So there's interesting stuff playing out there. And as I say, these are people that, we had some good speakers lined up, but we're working away. And Our Lady, as I said to Anthony when that happened, I says, don't worry, Our Lady will send other speakers to us. And since then, we've just got Dr. Stéphane, is it Mercier, who's on, do you know the guy from Belgium?
I don't know that name.
Okay, Dr. Stéphane, he taught his philosophy students in Louvain Catholic University in Belgium.
Yeah.
He taught his philosophy students the philosophical arguments as to why abortion is murder. He also taught them that they should also look at all of the other arguments and compare them based on philosophical reasoning. And 4 weeks later, he was suspended from the university. When his contract came up for renewal, they didn't renew his contract.
Yeah.
At that time, he was married, and his wife is expecting their first child. So this is how a Catholic university treats a young married family expecting their first child.
Upholding the teachings of the church.
Because he's upholding the teachings of the church.
Yeah, we hear this story over and over again. It's crazy. Well, send me a link.
He's very upbeat as well.
Send me any information you've got, and we'll be happy to help promote it. And is there going to be any online component, or is it just because more and more of these conferences, they're broadcasting them so people around the world?
Well, again, the Lumen Fidei Institute, we only launched last July, so we're one of those organizations. We're struggling. We're counting pennies. And,
understood.
Pence, and just we don't have a major budget, so we're running it as best we can.
Okay.
But we're going to make an impact.
Well, we'll be happy to help push it out if you want to get us that information, and that'd be fantastic. So
yeah, I'll send you an email, or if you send me an email to secretary, just so I have your correct details for that, because that doesn't go into the big pile, only into the small pile.
All right, John Lacken, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
You're very welcome. God bless you.
All right, everybody. Well, that's it for this episode of the OnePeterFive podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are listening via iTunes, we ask you to please go in there and give us a 5-star review. The more reviews that we have, the more likely it is that others will find our podcast as it rises up the ranks. Also, if you are watching on YouTube, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are planning on pushing out more video content, and if you've got a subscription, then you're more likely to see it, and that's a cool thing. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you on episode 49. God bless you. You've been listening to the OnePeterFive podcast. This has been a production of OnePeterFive Incorporated, copyright 2018, all rights reserved. If you have downloaded this podcast through iTunes, we encourage you to go there and leave us a review to help others find and enjoy our show. If you would like to support our work, go to OnePeterFive.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution. This not only helps to pay for web hosting and the fine content we provide, but keeps food on our tables, coffee in our cups, and the lights on, which really helps us see what we're doing. Until next time, I'm Steve Skojak. Thanks for listening.